Good morning. Gotta look. I think it's still good morning. No, good afternoon. Thank you for giving us an opportunity just to react to the forecast today. I would agree. I think it is a status quo forecast. I would not agree that we should be congratulating each other on a status quo forecast. I think Minnesotans want us to help create the growing economy that many other states have, and by getting government and regulation out of the way, I think we've got an opportunity over the next couple of years to really create that growing economy where Minnesota families can thrive. And I think that's what we really need to focus on. I'm excited to work with our new minority leader in the House, Melissa Hortman. I agree with what she said about Minnesota family budgets. I've talked an awful lot about that over the last few years. Today there is a budget surplus again in the state's budget, but Minnesota families aren't feeling that same benefit in their own family budgets. And unfortunately, the governor's policies over the last couple of years have actually taken more money out of Minnesota family pockets by way of higher health insurance costs and higher taxes. And I think we really have an opportunity to focus on Minnesota families. And I think that's what you'll see from Republicans over the next couple of years. I always think it's ironic. We spend so much time talking and thinking in St. Paul about how do we get more money into the state budget, or why aren't we getting as much as we need in the state budget. If you look at where we get our money, it comes from income tax and sales tax. And if Minnesotans are making more money, they'll have more money to spend, and we will have more revenue coming into the state. And I think we just have our focus in the wrong place in St. Paul. It needs to be on Minnesota families. We need to focus on how do we get more money into Minnesota family budgets. And if that happens, the state will be flush and successful. And I think that's where we need to change our focus. And that's one of the things that I'm going to work on, really focusing on over the next, this budget and the following year. So I want to say too that part of the reason that we have a surplus today is the fact that Republicans in the majority in the House showed a great deal of fiscal restraint in the last biennium. We passed a budget with this, I think, the second lowest spending increase in 50 years. And we still invested in the priorities that we cared about and that Minnesotans think are important, like education and taking care of our seniors. We've got some things that we still need to work on in the next biennium, roads and bridges and economic growth and some tax relief to help Minnesotans out. And of course, the number one issue that we think helped win this election for us, which was the fact that Democrats let Minnesotans down on health care. And we now have a big responsibility to fix that problem, but we can't fix it alone. Minnesota still has divided government, and we still need Governor Dayton to help us find a solution and a bipartisan solution to fix that problem. So I'll let Senator Gazelka speak, and then we can take some questions.
So I didn't even look at my clock, but he said it's good afternoon, so I'll say good afternoon. The budget forecast is pretty much what we all thought it would be, plus or minus a little bit, that it really was about where we thought it would be. And I appreciate that the speaker talked about some of the things that we're going to do. We're going to fulfill promises that we made. Number one in the Senate as well is going to be to fix the healthcare crisis. It is truly a crisis in many places, and if we do nothing about that, we will not have fulfilled a promise that we meant to keep. Because of the surplus that we have, I believe that we will find a comprehensive transportation bill that provides permanent funding long-term. I think you'll see that. But I don't think we should forget that if you look at spending moving forward, it looks to be growing into the future somewhere around 7% government spending. And that means that we really should be looking at each part of government from the bottom up. Are we doing what we should be doing there? I recall back in 2011, we actually passed the Sunset Commission, which looked at every agency, every board, to say, are you doing everything that you should be doing for the people of Minnesota? That was repealed. The Sunset Commission was sunsetted 2 years later when the other side took over. But I really think we should think about that. You know, are we spending the money the way we should be spending the money? This is the taxpayers' money, and I want to make sure that we use it wisely. So I'm thankful that we have a surplus. We're going to focus on some key issues that we talked about all along. The third one is tax relief. If we get some of that done in special session, that's a win for Minnesota. If we pass healthcare relief, an emergency package in the short term with the idea that we're going to do something else immediately once we take over in January, that's still a win for Minnesota. So I'm excited about the opportunities we have. I'm willing and excited actually to work with the governor. He mentioned some of the same things that we want to fix, so let's do it. Any questions?
$1.4 billion is a lot of money, but it's also, if you compare it to some of the things that didn't get done last year, I mean, you take the cost of the auto part sales tax, the cost of the vetoed tax bill, the cost of relief for premium relief for people, that starts to add up really fast, and by some measures, maybe more than $1.4 billion. Is there enough money to do all the things that you think we should and must do in Minnesota?
No, there's not. And we're going to owe it to Minnesotans to make sure that we look in every corner of state government to find efficiencies. And for me, efficiencies isn't cutting state government. It means we can actually provide better service by modernizing some of our computer systems and some of the way that we deliver services, and do those things more efficiently, but also more effectively. I think we can actually, at a lower cost, provide better services to Minnesotans. And those are the things that I want to focus on this year. We're not going to solve this by being lazy and just saying, this is how much money we have, how much are we going to spend and how much are we going to give back? We're literally going to have to be creative and go into the budget and look for efficiencies in every part of state government. And we really should do that every 2 years. Unfortunately, government is big, and these departments are not always forthright, and there's not an incentive always in the departments to find efficiencies and to provide that better service at a lower cost. But obviously the legislature appropriates their budgets and provides the oversight that I think we need to spend. I'm going to talk to my chairs about spending the first part of the next session looking at the money that these departments currently have, how they're spending it, looking at each program. Does it meet the original goals? Does it meet the needs? Does it need to be updated or changed? Or can we find some efficiencies? And I think we will find ways by modernizing state government to run it more efficiently and find some savings, but also do that in a way that will provide better service to Minnesotans. And I think that's what real leadership is, and that's what folks should look for from us.
Are you at all concerned that setting aside the subject of the moment, when the governor walked out of the Capital Preservation Commission meeting, did that pretend that there's going to be personality conflicts that just go all the way through this next session? I've talked to people who are worried about that, others who are not.
I respect the governor. We have a good working relationship. I will tell you, I get very frustrated with the governor at times. We had a pretty heated conversation on the phone this morning, and I raised my voice, and I apologize to him for that, but those things are going to happen. And we are all passionate about what we do, and if we care about what we do and we care about Minnesotans, at times we're going to show that passion. That's not the first time I've seen the governor walk out of a meeting. It's I think maybe the first time you've seen it. I've seen it a few times, quite a few times. I get that. It's frustrating for me. I don't like that. But for me, and maybe I'll just walk you through a little of my frustration on that day. The governor started that meeting by saying that he has chaired this committee for 4 years and that it hasn't ever been partisan. And now somehow we were making it partisan over paintings that were painted in 1906 and wanting to keep them in the space that they were originally commissioned for. That's somehow partisan. Maybe he forgets that tourists at the state fair were getting their picture taken with a $10,000 door, which never existed. You remember the state capitol, and they were accusing me of wanting a $10,000 doorway? I'll tell you what, that state capitol is beautiful. I went on a tour a couple of weeks ago. But I want you to pay attention to what you see there, okay? There is no $10,000 door. There never was. But I want you to look at the Senate suites, because if they didn't spend $1 million building those suites of offices for Senate leadership, I bet they couldn't get it for $1 million, okay? So to tell me that board has never been used in a partisan manner, and then to get up and walk out because we want to keep historic paintings during a Capitol restoration, it's offensive. So I'm going to need your help over the next 2 years. I want you to hold me accountable for what I say and for doing the right things to Minnesotans, but I expect you to do the same thing for the governor. And if we all do what's best for Minnesota, we respect each other and we work together, we're gonna accomplish a lot in the next 2 years, and I'm looking forward to it.
Are those the streets going to be used, or are they going to be idle?
I teed it up for you.
The Senate will use the spaces, but we have not completely decided how we're going to use the spaces. I was quoted publicly, though, as saying if the governor is going to remove those paintings, those precious paintings, the Senate will take them all into their areas. We have some areas that have very high ceilings, and we think that they're important to keep in the Capitol, and we will. But I don't know that we would have configured the Capitol like the Democrat Party did. But the one thing I will say is I'm glad that the Capitol is as amazing and elegant as it is. I will tell you that. When they built it 100+ years ago, they spent a lot of money then. So the fact that we finished it in style, I think is great. As far as the Senate building, I wish we hadn't done that, but we're moving into that building. That's the building that we have now, and we're going to move forward from here. But the actual Senate office space for the majority leader in the Capitol, I'm not sure yet.
The last time we had this political complexion at the Capitol, there did go to shutdown. What are you telling Minnesotans today, given this forecast, on your predictions for a shutdown?
Well, nothing has really changed because the numbers are basically exactly where they were before, which means that we will be able to, I believe, fix the healthcare crisis. We should be able to provide tax relief. We'll just have to decide where that comes from. And we should be able to have a permanent roads and bridges plan. And beyond that, we'll see. I mean, the Senate appointed 3 chairs to deal with health and human services issues because we know that that's one of the biggest areas it is the biggest area that we have to deal with. And so we hope to bend the spending curve in some of the areas of healthcare, and we may need to spend more money in other areas like the 5% plan for those that take care of disabled workers, mental health issues, et cetera. Yep.
I want to answer that
Go
one
ahead,
too.
yep.
I think if the governor, nobody's going to get 100% of what they want, right? That's the reality of divided government. We're going to talk about our priorities, which are going to be focused on helping Minnesota families. And the governor's going to talk about his priorities, and somehow we're going to have to mesh that together, okay? If the governor understands and is willing to compromise, if he doesn't walk out on Minnesotans at the end of session, then we're going to have a successful end of session. But it's going to take some compromise, and it's going to take the governor needing to meet us somewhere in the middle to get this accomplished.
Both the state economists and others have said that they're concerned, the unknown is in Washington now regarding trade policies, regarding many other healthcare. Do you share those concerns, or do you look to Washington and see great hope? What do you see?
Well, first of all, absolutely there should be uncertainty, that we're saying, what are they going to do now? It's a complete overturn of where we were with the promise that they will repeal and replace Obamacare. And so if they do that, which they say they will do, that automatically impacts Minnesota and what we do here. And so I think that'll be the number one issue. But the other thing we're all watching is who our president-elect is appointing for. Am I what?
Are you pushing for that? Are you hoping for that? Are you?
Yeah, I do. I hope that they do repeal Obamacare. But I think Minnesota, if we do it anything like what we used to have, was very effective and cost-effective coverage for everybody in Minnesota. We had MA on the bottom. We had Minnesota Care for the low-income people that couldn't afford it. We had MSHA, which took care of people that were ineligible because of health reasons. We took them. They'd get insurance, and then health insurance for everyone else at a cost that was much cheaper than what we have today. So I'm not saying that's what we'll do, but that was the best in the whole United States then. So let's lead again.
Do you feel like you would have to recuse yourself from any of the votes just because of your own insurance industry background?
My insurance business is property casualty, so. And
With all these uncertainties, how do you write a budget that you have
theory, no finish in May. Probably before a lot of these questions are answered, but as the governor, do you leave a bunch of money in reserve in case something happens?
Since the speaker's already worked with him 2 years, I'll let him answer that one.
You know, and I'm going to let Jim come up and talk about that too. This is not going to be easy. I think the number one issue, and we're going to have to triage. The number one issue that we're going to need to work on, not even waiting until day one to start working on it, is the health insurance issue. The individual marketplace in Minnesota has collapsed. It is being held on life support, and if we unplug that machine, it's dead. We're going to need to put some premium relief in the hands of Minnesotans to help them get through this. The federal government is going to do something. It likely will not happen in time where we need to make some serious decisions that will affect the insurance that people can buy on January 1st of 2018. So hopefully they can show us their cards a little bit in the first couple of months of their session. And we can take from that some things that we can do to put some reforms in place that will help for January 1st of 2018. But remember, the timeline here is really tight. We have to have serious reforms in place by for sure before April 1st, and probably even before that. So we can't let the healthcare crisis go until the end of session for the long-term reforms. Mary?
Speaking of that time frame, I don't know if you heard Senator Bach say special session before Christmas. In light of your conversation with the governor this morning, is that realistic?
I think that's actually likely. I think we're getting closer. I think this forecast was a help in that. And the interesting thing that the tax bill is probably important right now as well, because there's tax relief for the very people in the individual marketplace that are hurt by, the farmers and the small business owners. There's real serious tax relief in that tax bill for those people. So not just do we help them out with premium relief, but that tax bill will be a huge help to those people as well. I would say, we're going to meet this afternoon. I want to have a decision today on whether or not we'll have a special session. And I would say that I think it's likely.
Where is it?
I don't know yet. They were setting that up. I don't know. I think it's at 2 o'clock. I don't know where.
Bonding bill in that special session too?
I would think so. It may be slightly scaled back. Yeah.
Do you anticipate getting any, making a run at removing the fourth tier income tax this session?
We haven't really talked about that. I think what we want to see is tax relief for middle-class Minnesotans. I think that's what the tax bill that's on the table right now was targeted at, and I think you'll see that sort of target and focus in our policies moving forward, but we haven't specifically had those conversations yet.
Yeah, just briefly talking about, the uncertainty of what's going to happen in Washington and the Trump administration. I was at the Council of Economic Advisor meetings a couple of weeks ago where we have some other notable state economists come in and critique what the state economist is thinking of doing for the forecast. And that was just a few days after the election. There was a lot of uncertainty at that point, and I think people thought, there's probably more than the usual range of uncertainty here. And there still maybe is, but on the other hand, I think if you had that meeting today, people would probably be predicting a little bit better economy. If you look at what's happening in Washington, some of the things they're talking about doing, more infrastructure spending, dealing with some of the healthcare issues, cutting back on regulations, bringing money in from overseas that's been kind of trapped there for various tax reasons that'll probably spur some economic growth here. So there's certainly reasons to think that, come February, the forecast might be a little bit better. But obviously there is a lot of uncertainty of what's going on. We have a budget reserve to deal with those sorts of things. There is always uncertainty in these forecasts. In some ways, there's maybe a little bit more than the usual amount here, but we're approaching with the money that, at least at the moment, we're looking at saying is going to be in the budget reserve, being very close to have fully reaching what the state economist says we should have for a budget surplus or a budget reserve number. So those are all positive things.
That raises the question, a number of your people that spoke previously point out that 6 years ago, Minnesota had $6 billion in deficit, $2 billion to the schools. Rainy day fund was, gone. So why is it, from your perspective, that the last 6 years haven't been good management, good government?
Well, what I would say is that to a large degree, of course, what happens to the economy isn't just driven by decisions we make in Minnesota. They're driven by national decisions, even international decisions. One other thing that you can look for in a couple of weeks that's going to be a little bit different in this forecast is in the supplemental budget bill that we passed this last year. We instructed the state economist to not only give us the budget forecast as we have today, but a few weeks after this to give us a range of sort of history on how much you might expect it to potentially miss, either on the upside or downside, looking at past budget history going back many years. And so that'll be something that comes out in a few weeks, some additional analysis they're doing, and I think that's going to be helpful as we look at making decisions. So you just know, this isn't an exact, $1.4 billion. The one thing we know for sure is it's not going to be $1.4 billion that's sitting in the state checking account. If we change no laws in 2 years, it's going to be something more or something less. No one can be that accurate. And so we're going to have a little bit more of a range to look at based on history, and that'll help inform us too.
As it relates to that automatic transfer to the reserve, do you want them to press pause on that until the special session stuff is considered, so maybe some of that money could be used for these purposes that you've been discussing?
Well, I guess what I'd say is if we're going, that's sort of a decision for someone above my pay grade that could answer that. I think the anticipation would be that, I don't know that I like the governor's idea of taking the $300 million that would otherwise go into the budget reserve and using it for these purposes. I think I'd prefer to look at something, if we go that route, like the Healthcare Access Fund.
Do you want access to the money that's being transferred for potentially the tax bill or debt service and the bonding bill?
Well, again, I'm not really sure what all the negotiations are going to be around the special session, and that's maybe a question for the speaker.
We haven't really. Obviously, the governor's plan is to claw that money back and use that for the premium relief. My preference is to use the Healthcare Access Fund money for the premium relief. I also would, though, like to claw that money back and use it for the tax bill and the bonding bill that are sitting waiting. And that basically just resets the clock back to where we were. I really feel like we were so close to passing the tax bill and the bonding bill in a special session, and I believe that the Democrats didn't do it prior to the election because they were afraid it might help us or make us look good or successful or whatever. And I hope that's not the case, but unfortunately I think there were some politics at play. So I think clawing that money back and using it for those two purposes would reset the clock back to where we were prior. So that's what I'd like to see.
Would you use that money to make a tax bill in a special session bigger than what you passed in, at the end of session?
No, I think we need to stay fairly close to where we were at the end of session. I don't think the tax bill will change at all, other than the enactment dates of the different provisions, and then fix the couple of things that the governor wanted to see fixed, the one-word error and one other provision. I think the tax bill would look just like that. So, any other questions? Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.